Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. And this is top 5 reasons your campaign will fail. And I mean that genuinely. These are 5 reasons, whether you're someone who's, backing Kickstarters, in which case this is just interesting information, or if you're someone who's creating games, if you're someone who's trying to put together a game, launch a Kickstarter, then I genuinely believe this video is essential information for you, because we see a lot of campaigns that do well. We see campaigns from new creators, from old creators. We see a lot of campaigns raising hundreds and thousands and sometimes millions of dollars on Kickstarter. And then for every one we see succeed, there are dozens of others that either never even make it to the point of our attention, or sometimes they make it to the point of our attention, but they don't actually fund. It's the difference between having 15 backers and having 82 backers. They're still just not really going anywhere. And while there are no perfect answers, there genuinely are no perfect answers, I think that a lot of the reasons campaigns will fail is going to be covered in these 5 reasons. It's going to be these 5 things that you need to be on top of. Now, some of these, for what it's worth, some of these may be hard to do. They may not result in you being able to suddenly, check off this list and then create the Kickstarter. But I would argue that if you can't hit these reasons, if you can't hit a bunch of these reasons and knock them out, then it may mean that your Kickstarter, that your game, that your project just isn't really viable. And so let's go through these reasons. Let's go through them all, talk about them a bit in detail, and go from there. Now, if you hear the sounds of cooking in the background, well, you're not wrong. There's some sizzling, frying, or something going on. But either way, starting off with number 1, and number 1 is going to be price point. Now, price point is something that you can overcome if you're popular enough. If you're Stronghold Games launching Terraforming Mars, Ares Expedition, if you're Leader Games launching Root, Marauders, whatever it is, if you have a game that is popular enough, if you're a Thunderworks, where all of their campaigns, is it Thundergriff or Thunderworks? I always mix up those two. But the role player adventures, all their games generally cost more on Kickstarter than they're going to cost at retail, but yet people back them because they have enough of a following, enough of an audience. And so reason 1, price point, you can overcome that, but you effectively have to have enough of an audience to be able to overcome that, because price point is something people are looking for. Now looking for it to various degrees, don't get me wrong. There are people like myself who look at every single Kickstarter and try to be as critical as possible. Does it make sense to get this game now? But even if you ignore people like myself, there's going to be others who aren't necessarily as strict about, it's going to be $5 cheaper later or now. But there's still a price point that has to be met. There's still a degree of reasonable price that has to have people considering your game. If you're a game that looks like it should be a $30 game online, it's costing $60 plus shipping on Kickstarter, you're going to have a problem no matter who you are. You're going to have a problem no matter how large or small your audience. And price point it includes shipping and VAT in that conversation. The general idea is at the end of the day, people are consumers. They are sitting there making a decision as to what to buy. And that could be anything from buying Lost Ruins of Arnak at their local online game store, or it could be the other 3 Kickstarters that launched today. Or it could just be that they actually buy things other than board games, perish the thought. Or maybe they want to save money, which is a great thing. I highly encourage saving money, although you wouldn't think so from the way I do things on this channel. But the point is, price is a factor. Anytime someone spends money on your game, it's something they could have done elsewhere. They could have done something else with that money. They could have bought something else, or saved that money, or put it towards something else. Your price has to be competitive enough that people will actually look at your game, they'll look at your page, and they'll decide to hit buy now, or back now. So yeah, that's something you're going to want to consider. And again, if you can't do it, if you're just like, my margins aren't good enough, I can't get quotes that make sense, I just can't. That's great. I mean, it's not great, it's sad, it's unfortunate. But better to find that out now than to go through the work, the trouble, the effort of creating a Kickstarter, only to find out that you've done all the work and you've done all that stuff, and then there aren't enough people interested in your Kickstarter. Reason number 2, lack of a community around your campaign. And this is such a big one. If there's a single point on this list that it's worth walking away with, this one would be the one. Which means I probably should have made it number 1, but it's too late now. Lack of community. I see this time and time again. So I do a video every single month, okay? I do a video every single month where I talk about the upcoming Kickstarters. And in that video, I determine whether it's worth talking about those Kickstarters based on the amount of attention around those Kickstarters. In other words, what I have found time and time again, and I can show you examples of this. It's not content creators alone that spread awareness of upcoming Kickstarters. In fact, I would argue they are a small part of that machine. I can point to multiple Kickstarters that have Rado, they have Tantrum House, they have Man vs. Meeple all on the Kickstarter page, and yet they're not funding. Content creators alone aren't near enough. You need to have something about the product, something about what you're trying to sell has to have appeal to someone, has to have in some way spoken to the greater degree of an audience and captured their attention. I find Facebook groups are a great way to test this. Because what I do, one thing that I do, I actually picked this trick up from Quacklope to a degree, although I did it in other ways myself as well. But the general idea is when I'm trying to decide which campaigns are worth talking about in my upcoming month of Kickstarters. And the reason I choose which ones is because do you know how many Kickstarters there are coming out every single month? There's way too many to talk about every single month in a monthly video. But more importantly, I don't want to waste your time by talking about a whole bunch of campaigns that may never fund, that may never see the light of day, that you have no interest in. And so the way I determine whether a game is worth talking about is whether I've heard of it, and if I haven't heard of it, if I haven't just generally heard about it in the buzz, the ecosystem, the forums, the posts, the Facebook groups, whatever it is, if I haven't heard of it, then I go ahead and check how many people are following the campaign. If you don't have that up, how many people are following your Facebook page, your Twitter, your Instagram, anywhere where you might be on the internet, what does your community look like? Because if you have 72 people following your Facebook page, if you have 119 people following your Kickstarter page, I'm going to save you time right now. Your campaign is not going to fund. I would wager to say that there are no exceptions here. If you do not have an audience around your game, if you do not have people interested and paying attention before your campaign launches, then your campaign is DOA, right? Dead on arrival. You need to build up that community. I talked about this in a video a long time ago when I talked about 5 things about Kickstarter's essential things to do, and I included this reason there as well because I think it's that essential. You need to build up a community. And again, if you are unable to do so, that means your Kickstarter won't fund either. If you can't put out pretty pictures of your campaign on Facebook and have people liking and following the page, if you can't have some sort of visual on your Kickstarter page that has people clicking follow the Kickstarter, then those same people who didn't display the lack of interest then are not going to display the lack of interest now, only now you'll have a cancelled Kickstarter on the way as well, further devaluing your audience's trust in whether you can create a sustainable game. You need to create that hype, that buzz. You need to find out early on whether something about your game isn't appealing. It might be as simple as the box art. It genuinely might be something as just switching up the box art. That might be all you need to do. Better to find out early. When you're sitting there, you're putting out your ads, you're putting out your pages, you're trying to engage with people on social media, you're in the larger groups, occasionally getting involved, not just advertising because you want to be subtle about it, but asking questions, posting things in reference. And if no one's clicking through, if no one's paying attention, if no one's giving you the time of day, you need to figure out now how to change that pitch. Do it now while you still can. There's nothing wrong with having a Facebook group that takes 6 months to grow, 6 months to slowly build up a community. You'll find out slowly, the hard way, that there are things you need to do that it might take you longer than you thought. But then when it's time to actually launch, people have heard of you. You're not that new campaign that no one ever heard of, no one ever saw anything from. You're like, oh yeah, I've been seeing component pictures, I've been seeing game trays, I've been seeing art and design, and they've been involved in asking me questions about, do I prefer this art or that art? Build up a community around your game. And do it early on. You'll save yourself a lot of time and headache. And again, I cannot stress this enough. If you can't, your Kickstarter won't do well either. It's not like some magical thing where well, I couldn't get people to follow my Facebook page, but it's okay, they'll back my Kickstarter. They won't. That's just the way it works. They won't. If they're not interested then, they're not interested now. Your Kickstarter is not some magical solution to that problem of a lack of interest in whatever it is you're selling. Which brings us to 3. It's going to be tied together. My whole ordering system is wrong because there's a sequence where this makes sense, but whatever. Reason number 3, visuals and components. You can't get around it. Actually, it's not true. You could get around it. I don't know if I can point to any Kickstarter campaigns that have had 50 people following it and have funded. I don't know if I can find any of them. It just doesn't happen. But I certainly can find games and campaigns that have what I would consider to be poor visuals for that game, poor components, and less interesting looking whatever that have funded. I would argue that that's the strength of price point. That's the strength of community. You can kind of get around these things to a degree. That said, while I can find exceptions, I would argue that on a general basis, campaigns that don't look well don't perform well either. This is a regular problem I have. As a content creator, as someone who has to take on projects, a decision I regularly have to make is around people who send me their game. Alex, can you cover this game? And if it doesn't look pretty, I'm not going to cover it. It's not that games that aren't pretty aren't good. There are plenty of games that aren't pretty that will be good. Terraforming Mars, Castle of Burgundy, some excellent games in my collection. Sometimes they're just not pretty. Now, first of all, I would argue that the campaigns you see on Kickstarter that aren't pretty are worse than those two, well worse than those two. But past that, the problem you run into is if a creator couldn't get to the point where they made their game look pretty. They couldn't get good art. They couldn't get decent renders or miniatures or whatever it is you're selling in your game. And you don't need miniatures to sell. It helps, but you certainly don't need miniatures to sell something on Kickstarter. But if a creator wasn't able to get to that point in the process where they made the game look pretty, of course it can be an amazing game. It can be. But why should I as a consumer to have the time, the confidence in you that you left this part of your project unattended to, but the rest of it's probably amazing? Why should I have that confidence? There's a lot of things that go into making a game, and game design is just one small aspect of that. There's so many facets going on here that if you left one completely by the wayside, I just don't trust in you to perform in the others either. And I would argue most people are the same way. A pretty game does not make a good game. That's absolutely true. But I would argue there is a higher correlation between games that don't look pretty and aren't good. And on Kickstarter, you have to look pretty. This goes back to the building a community point above. If you want to build community, you need that box to pop. You need people to be scrolling through on Facebook and seeing something in a group somewhere, and they need to pause. They need to stop scrolling. They need to click to follow that page, or sign up for a newsletter, or whatever your call to action is. If it doesn't look good, it probably won't build up an audience. Again, exceptions apply. I can find exceptions to this one. This is more of a general rule as opposed to an absolute. Number 4, and this is, again, all tied together. Lack of advertising, pre-campaign page, sign-up, stuff like that. This goes hand in hand with community to a degree. But community on its own can be hard. Because how do you build up community? Just by having pretty-looking components, right? That does help. Being engaged in Facebook groups, and that does help as well. Finding ways to slowly but surely advertise that you have something coming. There are companies that are great at this. Ginger Snap Gaming, the creators of Ignite, and hopefully some more Kickstarters coming up soon, although they're waiting till Ignite delivers before they do more campaigns. They're incredibly amazing at being involved in Facebook groups and asking questions. Do you prefer this art or that? What about this art isn't resonating with you? But that takes a lot of work. What you can do, and what I've seen many companies do very successfully, is Facebook advertising, Google advertising, Instagram advertising, whatever form of BGG advertising. You can pay for your thing to be in front of other people's eyes. Now, going back to point 3, you ideally want your thing to look good. If you're going to spend the time paying a decent amount of money to have people looking at your game, then also spend the time to A/B test that image. A/B testing, the idea of showing different groups to people, showing, hey, this is option 1 of our game, this is option 2, which do you think is more likely to get people to click through? Ask your friends, ask your family, or literally just A/B test different ads and see which ones perform better. But you can get your game in front of a lot of eyeballs by going on BGG, by running Facebook ads, any form of advertising in the ecosystem, by going on Board Game Revolution and, having your banner of this upcoming game. You can definitely get a lot of attention and buzz around your game by paying for the attention to it. Now, it still needs to be worth paying attention to. Paying a lot of money for people to look at something that doesn't look pretty won't help you at all. It won't, unfortunately. So you need to focus on that graphic aspect. You need to focus on the visual and components. But if you can do so, if you can get that up to par, if you can get that to a point where something about your game captures others' attentions, it might be a well-placed miniature, it might be a few player boards, it might be some card crafting system, but something that sparks the imagination. Throw that in front of thousands and thousands of people by running a bunch of Facebook ads that, using their algorithm, finding target audiences, whatever it is they do behind the scenes, you can get a pretty high conversion rate on basically your game looking cool and selling people. And you can do this years in advance, by the way. You don't have to. I'm not saying you have to do it years in advance, but I've seen campaigns, I've seen companies running ads literally a year in advance of their game, just slowly testing the waters, building up that community, building up that group, because that day one launch, it's a big deal. It's a big deal that day one launch when you have campaign goes up and then thousands of people flock to back your game. Maybe they'll come back later, maybe not. This is one of the reasons we have early birds, by the way, because they hop onto your campaign page and they back now because they'll figure it out later. They just want to lock in that early bird. And that creates this groupthink around your campaign, this groupthink of, hey, everyone's backing this. Look at how high the funding's raising. This must be a winner. So early birds, for all the toxicity they cause, for all the complaints they cause, they exist for a reason. And combine a decent early bird with a ton of people coming to your page, you'll give them a reason to actually back your campaign and for it to start doing well. Reason number 5, and this focuses more on when your campaign actually launches. The first 4, I'd argue, are going to be pre-campaign, although visuals and components are both. You know, hopping onto an active Kickstarter campaign and seeing something that looks like it was cooked up in someone else's basement with their brother doing the art and their sister doing the overlooking of the graphic design or whatever it is. Nothing against the brother and sister. I'm sure they're nice people, but they clearly weren't artists or graphic designers. So yeah, that applies to a campaign page in general as well. But this one is specifically around campaign page, arguably pre-campaign as well, especially if you're running a Facebook group, if you have a community. But people not understanding how your game plays. If people don't understand what it is you're selling, what it is about your game, your gameplay that makes it unique, what makes it interesting, they're not going to back it. It's not entirely true. You will find people who do back it, but less people will back it. If they don't have a clear picture of what it is that this is going to be. And you can capture that picture fairly easily. Just the nature of games is there's always overlap in the system. Oh, this is a dungeon crawl. This is a deck builder. This is a card crafting system. This is a worker placement. There are so many key terms you can use to just get people up and running about the core concept of the gameplay. And you can do that with a few decent GIFs, a few decent, images or GIFs or showing the gameplay, some basic stuff that gives someone a general idea. They don't even need the full picture. They don't. Trust me. People will back plenty of things without a full picture, without knowing the rules, without knowing all that stuff. But they need to have some concept, some promise. Oh, this is a rondel system, and you go around here, and when you do that, you take your tokens, you put them into your resource pool, and then you use your resource pool to craft cards, and that goes into the deck building system, so it's like a rondel system deck builder. Oh, that's pretty cool. It actually does sound pretty cool, by the way. I kind of want a rondel deck building system now. If there's a game that does that, let me know, because that sounds really cool. But either way, the point is you can get people's attention with a few general concepts, a few general notes as far as how your game plays. But they need that. If they walk into your campaign page and they have to head over to the comment section to find out how this game plays, a whole bunch of them didn't even bother heading to the comment section. They just clicked away right away. So yeah, make sure that you have people understanding how your game plays. What Jeremy Howard likes to call the 3-scroll test. Scroll, scroll, scroll. If 3 full scrolls down your Kickstarter page, he doesn't know how your game plays, he's out. Now I'm more patient. I will last the whole entire page. But many won't. So factor that in. You have to have it on your page for sure, and ideally the higher up, the better. And reason number 6, and I know I said 5 reasons, but reason number 6 is kind of a tangent to this. It's not really 5 reasons of how to make your Kickstarter page successful. Reason number 6 is more something not to do, something to be aware of that you should not be doing. And that's just, don't piss people off. And that might sound like an easy or generic thing to say, but the general idea is there are many, many ways for you as a Kickstarter creator. And this applies to the big companies just as much as the small, by the way. In fact, I can make the argument it applies more to the big companies because the big companies people expect more from. But make sure that you're not pissing off your audience. Now, the nice part is if you're a big Kickstarter, if you're The Witcher, which just funded, if you're Edge of Darkness, if you're, not Edge of Darkness, what's that? Dead Reckoning. If you're Dead of Reckoning from AEG, if you're Kemet, any of these big campaigns, come on Kickstarter. They can afford to frustrate a portion of their backers. They have a large enough audience that they can take it, that people will still back their game. But the smaller you are, to a certain extent, you'll attract less attention. You'll attract less scrutiny, and you will be held to a lesser standard, which is good. But even amongst that, there are many ways where you can tick people off. There are many ways where you can frustrate your backers, and you are smaller, and you cannot afford to lose your backers. That might be something like bungling how an early bird works. That might be something like bungling how shipping works. Throwing shipping prices on the page that look extremely out of touch with reality. You'll have people walking away right away. Not responding to anything in the comments day one. Not having any update for the first 2 days. There are a million small ways to ensure that people lose confidence in your project. And you don't want that to happen. Because you're probably a smaller content creator. Not content creator. You're probably a smaller Kickstarter creator to begin with. You can't afford to lose people because you made a fairly bad misstep, whether it's pricing, whether it's shipping, VAT, any of those things. Figure out what those missteps are. Ideally, by the way, a general good rule of thumb is back a lot of projects. Before you become a Kickstarter creator yourself, ensure that you have backed enough projects and followed those projects and read the comments of those projects and read every single update of those projects to get a feel for what it's like to be a backer of those projects. It'll help you avoid a lot of the missteps along the way. And the games I picked to be next to me, the reason they're next to me, is because these are all from first-time creators. Well, technically this is a second-time creator, but Chronicles of Drunagar, the original Chronicles of Drunagar, was a first-time creator on Kickstarter. This was a Creative Game Studios' first campaign. They knocked it out of the park. Why is that relevant? because you can be a first-time creator. I can point to dozens of examples of first-time creators who knocked it out of the park. This is not some magical thing where only the people who've run tons of successful Kickstarters can run successful Kickstarters. If you do your legwork, if you do your homework, if you make sure you know what you're doing, if you actually put time, energy, and attention to it, you can become incredibly successful on Kickstarter. We have Arena, the Imperial Box over here, the Arena of the Contest by Dragori Games. They knocked it out of the park. They did it amazingly well. We have Project L from Boardcubator. Again, knocked it out of the park. We have Canvas, which I'm realizing in hindsight is not actually their first project. I'm pretty sure Project L was Boardcubator's first project. Canvas was not their first project, but it was, well, their first popular project. Does that count? I'm probably cheating. From R2I Games. They knocked this one out of the park. Again, it looked pretty. Price point was good. They built a community. The campaign page looked great. The components looked great. The how to play was awesome. All those things were covered well in that Kickstarter, in that page. There are so many Kickstarters, and you don't need miniatures. That's why I brought Project L and Canvas. You don't need miniatures either. You don't have to be some over-the-top miniature games like these two to raise money to build a community around your games. But you have to put the work in first. I see so many Kickstarter campaigns. I cover Kickstarters every week in my Monday Roundup. I talk with them every single week. And every single week there are some that aren't funding, that aren't doing well. And inevitably, I would say the biggest thing that is usually a commonality amongst them is I usually haven't heard much about them until they launched. They usually did not build much of a community first. Past that, the other four, price point, visuals, the lack of advertising before the campaign, the people not understanding how it plays, they'll check a few of those boxes too. But the biggest one by far, I didn't hear about them until it was too late. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. If you have any other reasons, anything else you think, whether you're someone who's run Kickstarters, whether you're a backer, if there's any other reasons or things you think I've missed, I'd be curious to see them in the comments down below. There are a lot of people out there who want to create a game, want to put on a Kickstarter, and want to have people backing it. And there's always some missteps along the way as to things they could have or should have done differently or better. Until next time, have a good one.